Welcome to the Powell Historical Society November program. My name is Scott Whittick. I am the Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Powell Historical Society. We're really happy to see everybody here tonight. We've got a good crowd. If you're not already a member, we invite you all to become one. There's different types of memberships, families, individual, lifetime, so anything, any kind of situation, we've got a membership for it. The donations and the membership dues really help us maintain the Martin Perry House, which is our headquarters and our museum where we keep all our records and archives. If you've never visited the Martin Perry House, we invite you to do so, but please contact first to make sure somebody's there where there's not somebody there all the time. So, we'll get on with this program. This evening, we have with us Becky Sutherland Cornett, PhD. She is a retired healthcare administrator. She is an independent researcher and history enthusiast working on earning a certificate in public history. Becky was the moderator of Ohio History Alive, an in-depth discussion group on the Conestoga Society of the Ohio Historical Connection for 4 years, and is a former member of the Delaware County Historical Society. And she just completed coordinating a 6-week course for Ohio Wesleyan University's Lifelong Learning Institute titled History is All Around Us. Becky is a member of the Organization of American Historians, the Lincoln Forum, and the American Association of State and Local History. She is a frequent presenter on a variety of history topics and attends history symposia and conferences around the U.S. Recently, she sponsored and was featured in 2 videos produced by History in Your Own Backyard. You can check out on the internet. One about Sunbury and another about Carnegie Library in Delaware. She knows her stuff. Becky's presentation is titled The Stagecoach Era in Central Ohio and contains information about the canal system, steamboats, trains, and how taverns and inns were the center of community life, post offices, and places to get the news of the world. She will show Charles Dickens' travel route through Ohio, including Delaware on the Sandusky Hike, that shows how he took 3 different modes of transportation. Please welcome to Becky Cornett.
Well, knowing your stuff is all relative, right? Whoever, you're an expert compared to who else is in the room. But as I learned recently, I was at a Williamsburg conference on taverns, where the real experts were telling us, in which I gained a lot of information about colonial tavern life, which I'll talk about tonight. Well, this is a picture, photo, or maybe it's a drawing, I'm not sure, of the Red Brick Tavern. Has anyone eaten there? It's right on the old National Road, Highway 40. You go down 42, turn right, some yards, and there it is. And it's the real deal. It was one of the busiest inns on the National Road in the 1800s. So, and today it's a thriving restaurant, and they're restoring it to its original appearance. So please go there. I don't get a commission or anything. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the critical importance of stagecoaches to the development of the West. And by West, first we're talking about the old Northwest, which is us. And then many people associate stagecoaches, and I've had people challenge me saying, well, stagecoaches weren't important here, that's out west. And I said, no, this was the West. And so, but because of all the old movies and shows, we think of the Wells Fargo stagecoaches. And I had the opportunity to be on the Overland Mail Trail in New Mexico last year, which I loved. And people thought on my tour, like, that I was so excited about it. But it is thrilling what's out west, but so is here. And then we're going to talk about, and you'll see books over on the table for anyone that wants to read about the history of the Postal Service, which is very much involves stagecoaches. And we'll finish up by talking about the newspapers and how newspapers were used, of course, to, like today, although, well, not print so much, but spread information, but that's, people read them in the taverns. And then also, of course, the infrastructure involved, the taverns and the Columbus Sandusky Pike, which was the mud pike, US 23. And I'll have a pretty comprehensive program next April at the barn about transportation. And it will talk about, I'm hoping to have a historian from ODOT there to talk about 23 in all its history, including today, where we're also embroiled in controversy about what to do with it. It's always been an issue from the very get-go. Okay, so I really like this, and it's from a book called Stagecoach East. And it really sums up the importance of stagecoaches. They were much more than a mode of transportation. It set the very tempo of life in pre-Civil War America. It was the primary carrier of the mail, and it was the country's major communication system. And businessmen depended on it for crucial economic reports. Politicians in Washington and state capitals relied on stage-delivered mail, so they knew the concerns of their constituents. Now, I don't know if it made any difference. Like today, I don't know. That's debatable. And then the newspapers were delivered. And here's what's really interesting. Americans were the largest newspaper reading population in history. And as I learned in Williamsburg maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, that the literacy rate then, back in colonial times, and then until I'm not sure when that stopped, but was off the charts. Everyone could read pretty much, that was there. So I wonder what that says about today, where our literacy rates are declining. And then for 80 years after the Revolution, this importance of stagecoaches was a major factor in our civilization. Now this picture is the Old West, right? I mean the West. And this is what we mostly associate, because it's exciting, right? The movie, Stagecoach, all that, so. And Wells Fargo, and there's a book, I don't know if I brought the one, a fascinating book about Wells Fargo. And of course, they are synonymous with stagecoaches, and they have stagecoaches in their headquarters, and it's pretty cool, the whole history of Wells Fargo. I'm trying to get Sunbury to buy a stagecoach, because we'll see in a minute, Sunbury was on 2 important stage routes, which was not typical in the state. Other places were, but Sunbury was a very busy stagecoach. In fact, the plaque in the town hall, town square, where the town hall is, says it was a stagecoach town. It grew up around the stagecoach, much like Ostrander and Powell grew up around the rail, right? That was a stagecoach. Yet they don't really emphasize that, and they don't have a stagecoach, which I find absurd. But this is not the stagecoach that they would have run. It's of course amazingly beautiful, but that's the one I think they should get. Just because it's fancy, and they could run it around the square at different festivals, and people could rent it for hundreds of dollars for their wedding or something, right? It would be great. So I love this with, of course, Mark Twain, and we'll hear from Charles Dickens too. In 1870, in a Concord, coach. Oh, the coaches were first, were made by, we actually ended up with some Concord coaches, not looking like this, but they were first made by Abbott and Downing in Albany, New York, and another couple places. And they have a museum there. And you can ride stagecoaches today at some of the places in New York State, some of the resorts. I haven't ridden in a stagecoach yet, but I really want to go out there to do so. Out west you can, of course. And has anyone taken a yellow stagecoach tour of Yellowstone? You can do that. And they warn you, though, this is the real deal. It's not, no, it's like no one's, you know, if you ride around Yellowstone in the stagecoach, you're really going to experience what it was like, which would not have been very comfortable. But they thought it was amazing, the people who rode in them, because that was the modern, and by the way, fancy way to travel. So here's what Mark Twain said: "Our coach was a great swinging and swaying stage of the most sumptuous description, an imposing cradle on wheels. It was drawn by 6 handsome horses, and by the side of the driver sat the conductor, the legitimate captain of the craft, for it was his business to take charge and care of the mails, baggage, express matter, and passengers." The express matter would have been how American Express started in Wells Fargo. Cash and business documents. "We sat on the back seat inside. About all the rest of the coach was full of mail bags, for we had 3 days delayed mails with us. We changed horses every 10 miles all day long and fairly flew over the hard, level road." That's exactly a wonderful description that I've read in pretty much all the articles and books about how it would have been. This stagecoach you can see at the Ohio State House. They have it in this obscure corner, which I don't like. I might write to the governor. But this was used, and this was Columbus to Lancaster. Now, some people might be interested in the engineering, which I know nothing about, but I just know about the thorough braces, and this is why stagecoaches were more comfortable than riding on wagons, which really would have been awful, because it did sway, like Mark Twain said. The braces caused the stagecoach to sway, kind of like suspension today, so that it was more comfortable. But then you also, of course, swayed and went up and down, right? This is what, in our rural areas, the mud wagon, this is what would have, not the lovely Concord coach like that. That would have been for much improved roads. This would have been like out here, right? I conferred with some people in Sunbury, and that's definitely what. And why is that? Because we'll see the roads were terrible. And of course, with any weather, and it frequently broke down, turned over, you know, you name it. They had to ford rivers, you know, all that kind of stuff. So you needed these thick wheels, and also was lighter, smaller, and plain, and by the way, much less expensive for the companies to purchase. And then they just have these canvas, not glass, but canvas roll down. But there was plenty of mud, lots of mud. This is a brand name for the mud wagon called Celerity. And when I was out west, well, I lose track, this year and last year, I took some of the pictures. They aren't that different. This is not a Wells Fargo coach. I wouldn't take that picture because they did never run here. This is definitely one that was around here. I got this from the Columbus Metropolitan Library's collection. And typical people were sitting up. Can you imagine trying to balance, you know, with how it would have been like, but no, they were sitting up there with suitcases and wasn't very safe. But also the fares, the people that got to sit inside paid more. And it depended. And if you couldn't pay, people walked. People mostly walked. You know, this was not like you just, some people said, oh, that was the mass transit. It wasn't, because it was pretty expensive, you know, comparatively. Just like planes used to be really expensive. Passage on ships was very expensive. You know, about the Titanic, they were paying like $40,000 in some, you know, in today's. Yeah, so this might have been hundreds of dollars to cross, some even thousands to go on long trips. This is like a bus, an omnibus, and this actually, you know, and the roads were usually privately run and had tolls and turnpikes. I mean, actual, you know, pikes that to stop you to pay the toll. And they had to cross the Olentangy River. Brent Carson found this description, which I love, about the stage arrival at the hotel on the corner where the PNC Bank is today, is where the stage stopped at the hotel, first at the Hinton House, and there's a huge story. We can talk about that sometime. Otto Hinton, huge story, connected with the stage and a hotel owner, but it was at the Hinton House and then later at the Donovan Hotel, and that's where they stopped in Delaware. So at first they would, and there was a lot of drama and legend and lore about the stagecoach arrivals and departures and horn blowing, and the drivers were considered celebrities. Right. So they would come, you know, there's a kind of a valley. So you'd be at the Courthouse Hill or the Ohio Wesleyan Hill, and then you come down. So they would come real fast and blow the horn, and people would get out of the street when the horn was blasting, and then they'd come screeching halt in front of the hotel. And then that's where they'd come and get their mail. There would be the newspapers. Pretty fun. And now today with virtual reality, we could recreate that. And you could just hold up your phone and you could see this whole scene. Would that be cool or what? I think it'd be amazing. It costs money though to have someone do that, but it's cool. Yeah. Another thing that I found out when I first was researching stagecoaches is that Delaware County, and you know, I'm new because I've only lived here 7 years, so that's new, you know, for Delaware County, right? For some of you, there's like from the year one, your ancestors lived here. So I didn't know until I started looking at, because nobody was really talking about it, that this was one of the country's major centers for Percheron draft horse breeding. And sure enough, Percherons pull stagecoaches. And so this was a center for stagecoach horse teams, you know, not just for use here, but for all over the place. They're beautiful, right? And of course you needed 4 to 6. Oh, you had to have 4 to get a mail delivery license. And that's how the stage companies mostly made their money, is through mail contracts with the federal government. And that's why, too, they had to deliver the mail. So sometimes they traveled through the night. Some stages were just for passengers, but mostly mail and passengers. And so that, like Mark Twain said, the mail had been delayed. We had to get through. They had to deliver the mail and weren't going to get their money, and they'd be kicked out of the contract. And so, and the horses, and I'm trying to find out, I've got some people that are going to look with me, and maybe some of you know, that there were farms that were just horse relay, you know, to change the horses, because you wouldn't necessarily, sometimes there was a one-stop shop, and you would have the passengers rest or even stay overnight or eat, the horses and all that. And some of the contracts were that the innkeeper had to provide all kinds of stuff. So including the food for the horses, somebody to take care of the horses, this and that, changing the teams. It was kind of like the Daytona, or pit stop, right? That you had to do all that. Sometimes it was just a few minutes because they had to keep going. Sometimes it was, overnight or whatever. But the horses would starve, die, dehydrated. They had to be changed because they were kind of running, for the 10 miles. So they had to, and of course there were inns every so many miles. A lot of logistics. Like we think things today are complicated. They're not. This was, because they didn't have a lot of what we have to facilitate. And then you'll see, and this is, of course, an automobile, still the roads like that. No one here is old enough for that, but our parents were. So this is the Columbus-Sandusky Pike was the mud pike, right? Muddy for a long time. Then this, and I was told at Sunbury, they had, in most places, the corduroy roads at first, which you can see they're logs with dirt over them, which was a big improvement because at least there was something to hold, not just sinking down. But what a great road, right? When I go down to, Sunbury has one of the old brick road, and then if you go to German Village, I think that's horrendous. You only can creep along with your car. Imagine a corduroy road. But then there was a big improvement, plank roads. And I found out, not only last year, and I'm still working on an article about this, that the Radnor Road, which is 203, was planked in 1855. There's a whole record of investing. So this was privately owned by the Radnor farmers, the Penrys, if you've ever, Penry Road. Walter Penry was not the current Walter, but from great, he was one of the main investors and forces behind the plank road. Now, why was it so important, from Delaware to Radnor and beyond? Actually, the Radnor Road was one of the most used in the state. And why was that? Because of a huge agricultural area. They needed to move livestock, and they needed to move their crops and market goods. And that's why it was so important to them to have people coming and going. So their inns, they want to say they were Stagecoach inns. That was not the Stagecoach. They were not on that route. Wagoner inns and drover inns. Because we say, everyone mixed together. In the past, no, they didn't. Stagecoach was for, like today, the Hilton, or whatever, wagon people. Some of them were like freight wagons were Teamsters. Like we say today, the Teamsters are for semi-truck. They were the semi-trucks, the big Conestoga wagons. We'll see in a minute, and other big freight wagons. So, and then people were still traveling by wagons, not stagecoach, because unless you had the money, you're going to be stuck, on wagons, private wagons, freight wagons, but still, and walking. But very important, droving was a huge thing here, as well as, which is literally walking sheep, cattle, horses, probably not chicken, pigs, hogs, hogs, I think is the right, swine. Right. And imagine that, but it was a huge, huge thing. Major area. Then, and it's not macadam. Some people try to, it's a macadam. No, it's not. It's for macadam. And why is that? Because the engineer's name, Macadam. Macadam Road, right? So if you don't learn anything else, it's macadam. The National Road was the second one in the country. The first one was out in Maryland. I have to thank Ed Hoare, who comes to the lifelong learning classes always, sits in the front row. I was doing a presentation similar to this, and he said, oh, do you want a copy of the routes for the state of the stagecoaches? I went, yeah, where do you? So he said, here it is. And so he gave me a version of this, which is on Amazon, which I ordered today. And this is, the point is to say, I even have told other stage inns, the Overland Inn in McCutcheonville I went to visit, and they didn't know about this, so I gave them the route, because they also misnamed their route. They thought they knew all this stuff. I go, well, no, you don't. So, so anyway, it was thrilling for me to get this. But the point is, which when I got this, I didn't know this, that there have always been like AAA guides. So this Mitchell, it was all of it, all the towns arranged for all the different transport. So it talked about stagecoaches, steamboats, river boats, all that stuff. So that's always been, and imagine how hard it would be today, easy as pie, right, to find out anything, how challenging it would have been to get all this together, rail too, to get all this together for people. So when we're going to talk about Dickens' route, so that's how Dickens found out, with his entourage and so on, where to go and how to navigate all this logistics of using these different modes of transportation. So that's really neat. And the fact that you can get this on Amazon now is great. So, and I first got interested in stagecoaches at Sunbury when I learned about Myers Inn being, well, it was called the Sunbury Tavern. But you'll see I've bolded that they were on these two routes from Cleveland to Cincinnati and Columbus to Sandusky. When it first started out, like in 1820 something, there were some a mail route in as early as 1816 up 315, or the Olentangy Road to Delaware from Columbus. But they had just from one town to the other, and then it expanded from there to become like a statewide route, different companies. So the main person who owned the stage lines and routes was William Neal, the Stagecoach King. And he's written about does anyone know who Ed Lentz is? Yeah, so he's written excellent articles about the stage. So here's one about William Neal was a Columbus success story in the 1800s. So you know where Ohio State is? That was Neal's farm, and there was a Neal House Hotel and Neal Avenue. That's who it is. And he was the Stagecoach King, which I didn't know the whole time I worked at Ohio State. So I would have been much more thrilled knowing that he was that. And then, and he says all this, stagecoach business was a tough, demanding trade. There was a lot of competition, it was really difficult. And again, all the logistics, all the stuff that had to be taken care of. Passengers were demanding, they wanted food and rest, and they slept 3 to a bed often, which was, I guess, pretty common in Williamsburg. They said, people, friends, strangers, it was common for men to sleep together, women, we didn't have the privacy issues then, or well, they might have, but I guess they didn't have a choice. But and the beds were none too clean often, because of course, it wasn't like the innkeeper could throw the sheets in the washing machine, and it was a big deal. So a lot of challenges for people, and you didn't wash very much because there wasn't a lovely marble shower, and so. And then he said, stagecoaches opened the 19th century to interstate commerce and travel. So this, I love the way he, summarizes Ed Lentz. But you'll see, and I recently, comparing this with where some of these old inns are, which I did a whole inventory recently of all the old inns and taverns that I'm asking Tourism Ohio, that runs Ohio Magazine, to have a trail, because some of them are museums, some of them are restaurants like the Red Brick Tavern, some of them are still inns. There's a lot. The granddaddy of them all is the Golden Lamb in Lebanon, which is beyond cool. So, and it's owned by, who's the former senator? I always forget his name. Who? No. A Republican, a senator who, well, if anyone, look on your phone, like, which senator owns the Golden Lamb? And you'll be surprised. It's cool. So I'm going to get him, if they don't do this trail, I'm going to ask him to make it happen, which he will, because it's the Golden Lamb. But anyway, so you'll see all this matches up with these places. One thing I was surprised about, I don't see it on here now, but Norton. Norton, which is on 23, was a big deal. Stop. I want to find out more about it, because I've been there. It's not easy to tell what or if anything was around there, but Norton.
Was the Worthington Inn?
Oh yes, yep.
That was.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely, and it's coming back. Oh, here's Norton. Yeah, so from Columbus to Worthington, Delaware, Norton, Marion. This is the one that I went to, which is really McCutcheonville. But the name of the stop is Tomochi, which they didn't know, which is because there was a huge American Indian presence in Upper Sandusky. Big, yeah.
The senator was Portman?
Yes. Senator Portman owns the Golden Lamb. Yeah. Thank you. This just shows, this is one of the maps from the Mitchell's Guide, just like we have a map today, but it had all these, see all the intricate stops for all these areas. All right, so postal routes. So, so Philip Zinn, big name in stages, began his postal route to Chillicothe from Columbus in 1816. In that weekly, and then it gets semi-weekly. So by 1820, they were delivering to Delaware along the Olentangy River. Oh, and this, they did a commemorative stamp, which would be worth a pretty good amount if you have anyone stamp collector? No. All right, so I think part of the reason stagecoaches seem much more famous in the West is because they lasted longer out there than in the East. Things moved, like the sophistication from the colonial areas that became states and then through the West. So, we had things before the West, so they had to follow so many trails. So I think I had mentioned without government subsidies that accounted for up to half of the stage company revenue, then they could not have expanded to the remote places, because no profit-driven place is going to deliver in these rural areas. So this is from the book, How the Post Office Created America. Very interesting. And has anyone been to the U.S. Postal Museum in D.C.? It's next to Union Station, and you'll see this, full scale, which I was like, oh, so excited to see, thrilled. And of course, it's one of the, for that, they picked one of the beautiful Concorde coaches. Mostly, they weren't looking like that. All right. So the Stagecoach fares, just to give you an idea. So in 1826, a 104-mile trip was $3 in northern Ohio, which would be $80 today. And you'll see that, like, for example, $100 in 1840 is $3,600 today. 500, so it just gives you, 50 cents is $18. So this isn't, of course, our county, but the National Road is one of the most important developments in the whole country. There's a number of roads that built America, including there was the Wilderness Road, the Wagon Road, but the National Road, well, actually starting with Zane's Trace, which is hugely important, and Zanesville makes a big deal out of it, and rightly they should. This is at the Clark County Heritage Museum. They have a pretty neat exhibit in Springfield. And when I first went there, I had a private tour of the museum, and I was like, I wonder why they are making such a big deal out of the National Road, other than they were on it. Well, it was the terminus for a long, long time. So they claim it, as like the thing for Springfield. And they attributed their growth, of course, to being this major town. There's a stage, no, not a stage. The Pennsylvania House today is a pretty large museum, an inn. They make it clear, as I was saying, it was not a Stagecoach inn. There were tons of stage inns, wagoner inns, and drover inns on the National Road. They were a wagoner inn. But most people don't know that, and we try to, like everything in our county, we say is a Stagecoach inn, and people do not like it when I go, it wasn't a Stagecoach inn. But, okay. It's like saying, in the Underground Railroad, these houses were not on the, but, okay. Somehow, as people, it's very important to them that these things are, that they claim it, but it wasn't. And they say it right up front. It was a wagoner inn. It's very nice. It's just, they didn't have the contract, with the stage companies. And it's just it's also different scheduling, and, all that. And here's the National Road. And of course, Ohio goes right through. It's a big deal. I'm going to try to drive the whole thing, which you have to find out. Back there is a big pamphlet about it, how to do it, because some of it is, which I hate, 70, but part of it is 70, Highway 70, interstate. But I've been at the terminus there, and also there's a wonderful National Road and Zane Grey Museum in Norwich. Everyone should go there. It is great. When I went, and made them show me every inch of it. There's a big, display about it. And the guy said, I don't think anyone's ever been this excited about it before. I go, I am. I just want to know. It's just so great. He's like, okay, lady. All right. So then here, this is also at the Clark Museum, where they show the Franklin County commissioners established tolls. Because again, you had to pay. Well, just like today, I went, I was in West Virginia, going through there after Williamsburg, and of course had to pay tolls on their turnpike. It's very different. They don't, I mean, there is literally not so much the barrier, but you're not supposed to go through it. So I have Easy Pass now, thank heaven, but. And then this shows on the National Road that there would have been all, the wagons, there would have been stages, there would have been, and apparently it was like rush hour a lot, with all these, and imagine having to, like if anyone's been in England, Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, you do stop for the sheep. And so same there. And you just wait. Wagon. Okay, and there's a Conestoga wagon at the National Road Museum, distinctive with this blue. I do want to point out, again, this is like the semi-tractor trailer of its day, massive, very heavy. These were not the wagons that people used to go on the wagon roads out west, the west-west, like to Utah. Way too heavy, weren't for the family. Those were prairie schooners, much lighter. Not horribly different looking, but much smaller. So people often say, oh, they were all the Conestoga wagons. They weren't. There's no way they could get across all those passes. I was in Utah recently and had tours about the Latter-day Saints, which some people call Mormon, and their incredible journey with the wagons and how they had to literally build their own roads through the mountain passes, which would have been you had to really, really want to get there to where they settled. Incredible. And there's no way a heavy wagon, and I saw the wagons. They have, displays in some of the towns of the actual wagons they used. Incredible. And then here's about droving. Oh, turkeys too. Weird, but I don't know how you gather turkeys. This I got from a museum in Utah because I thought, okay, this is right. But it would have been similar, right? Look at that. Look at how many. But that's what they did. And there's a drover, I think Belmont, Ohio. There's a drover road, like monument. Yeah. So another thing, I want ODOT to help me find where were the drover roads, because they tried to separate them, but I don't know much about it yet. But I'm going to find out because somebody knows, right? Right. All right. So now an important factor is the interdependence of the modes of surface transportation. So it wasn't like the stagecoach was it and nothing else was around. No. So there was Ohio River steamboats, steamships on Lake Erie, the canal system, and railroads beginning. Railroad came to Delaware in 1851. So here's Dickens' route. So you'll see, which he probably got from that Mitchell guy, how he came by steamship, steamboat, and canal boat, the majority, in 1842. But the green through our area and a little bit up here. Oh, that was Stagecoach Central. Remember? The Abbott and Downing, so they kept their business going. But mostly it was other modes of transportation. But we didn't have here the canal in our area. And of course up here, and which is funny, when I first moved to Ohio, people kept saying about how it was such a big deal. At one point, Sandusky was this band. I was like, why is Sandusky? Like, because of the steamships, right? So that was a huge deal. It couldn't be more important. But nobody really said that to me. Like, they didn't really know. I said, well, there has to be a reason why Sandusky was such a big deal. So this is a great way to show in 1842, what was available. And this is from at Meeker House at Delaware, a plug to come and see that exhibit about wilderness transformed. And this shows about the different horseback and two-wheeled carts and wagon and boat and flatboat. And all right, so steamboats on the Ohio River. The first steam-powered vessel was the New Orleans. It was a side-wheeler built in Pittsburgh, 1811. So that's early. And because of this, Cincinnati became very important. So you'll see this timeline. Of 143 steamboats operating on the Ohio River, 48 were built in Cincinnati. New turnpike system, right? And roads brings more produce to Cincinnati, bolsters the river trade, because it's all about commerce, making money, entrepreneurship, getting people fed, getting all these things transported. The Miami and Erie Canal was completed in 1845, which then linked Cincinnati and the Ohio River with Toledo and Lake Erie, so all the way north. Farmers and merchants could send their goods directly to ship west and south. Cincinnati was one of the most important cities in the whole country. Couldn't be, I can't overstate how important Cincinnati was. Then you'll see this, the railroad ends at the waterfront, all these passengers. And then, of course, the Civil War, since we're right there on the Ohio River to Kentucky, starts, making a mess of everything in the Civil War. Then the steamship comes to Lake Erie, 1818. And I love this, called Walk in the Water, was the first one. And so that became, Lake Erie, as I said, was a very important port. And then, now I've just gotten really interested in the canal system. It didn't last that long. 1825 to 1913 was very difficult to build, mostly by immigrants. It was really tough, but very important. And places really competed to be on the canals. So I was in Sydney, Ohio, where they have an excellent exhibit there at their museum, and they fought tooth and nail to get the Sydney feeder to be on the canal. And I had no idea until several weeks ago that Grand Lake St. Mary's was the largest man-made lake in the country for a while. Grand Lake St. Mary's. And Buckeye Lake, another very important. Today it's just like people live there in kind of a resort. Well, it was a big, big deal on the canal. Linked a lot. Ohio, definitely the center of it all. As we call it, Ohio, the heart, it really, for many reasons, definitely is. I was in last summer in Tip City, and here's Canal Lock 15 of the Miami and Erie Canal, their monument to that. I was with some friends, and they wanted to go to dinner and so on. They like to go to the little shops there. And I said, oh, what's down the hill there? Isn't that the lot? They had no idea. I was like, oh my God, how do you not know about them? So I had to, of course, tell them all about it. They were like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. I go, no, this is really important. So here's what, I said, look, you can buy this painting at the gift shop, right? So they were like, oh, that's nice. I go, yeah, it is. It really is, right? This is what it would have looked like. See, here's the, and they have the old lock tender building and everything. They've saved, come on. So, and then here's a scene from and you can go today to Johnston Farm and Indian Agency in Piqua and ride this canal boat, also Coshocton. So definitely do that. All right, so trains come to Ohio. And that's for the April presentation. The rail could not be more important to Ohio. Ohio is one of the had at one point more rail miles than any place in the country. Texas, but yes, extremely important. And this was 1836, the Erie and Kalamazoo Rail. I went to school in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where the first railroad completed west of the Allegheny Mountains and connecting Toledo with Adrian, Michigan, which I've been in many times. I was like, really? I had no idea that Adrian was this big thing, with rail. I was like, wow. So, and they don't say anything about it. They need to shout that and say, what? We started rail or something. A lot of these towns just don't, they need to market their history tourism, I think. But so anyway, the Little Miami Railroad, Columbus and Xenia Railroad. And then one of the things I want to do too is get photos of all the different depots in the county. And apparently there were lots of them here. Some are still standing, a couple. But I think that would be fun to put all of them together and talk about how important they were and what the different routes were. Oops. Oh. Then this is funny, because the stagecoach then kind of dwindled, of course. In Sunbury, it lasted till 1873, which is late, because the rail didn't come there till 1873. And Sunbury had to pay for the rail to come. Just like Sydney, they had to pay thousands of dollars, different citizens, to get the rail to come there. And so what's funny, though, is at first, with some of these steam, notice the cars are coaches. Well, so one thing is important to point out. A coach becomes a stagecoach when it's on a staged route. Otherwise, it's a coach. So when I was in Williamsburg, in Boston in the summer, I learned more about John Hancock, and there's a great book about John Hancock called King Hancock, and it talks about him, very wealthy, having his own coach, and of course he only shared it when he had to with people, but his would have looked like, but it wasn't a stagecoach because it wasn't part of the staged routes. It's a coach, right, or a carriage, right? And then I love this, and there's some great pictures of Delaware too, with different modes of transportation and people. But this was right on High Street. The train comes right through. Imagine, right through, yeah. All right, so just a few taverns and inns that I want to make sure everyone knows. I already talked about the Red Brick Tavern. The Pennsylvania House, it's a museum that's on Route 40. And then Halfway House, what was that? That's the Gooding Tavern, US 23. Today, it's a political strategy and PR business. So they're the ones that come up with those attack ads. I mean, seriously. Right. But good for them that they saved that wonderful place. It used to be this amazing farm, 1,000 acres. It was cool. And I think I have a slide. And then the Sunbury Tavern, which is the Myers Inn Museum on the town square in Sunbury. And it's open Saturdays and Sundays. And then they have programs too, every month. So here it is, I already talked about it. Presidents stop there. Oh, and by the way, some of these people, these famous people, like John Hancock, they had their own coach. And they were given coaches, and they were emblazoned, with their campaign or their name. Or everybody, they've always been self-promoters, right? Always. They have this wayside sign out in front of the restaurant. Pennsylvania House, 1822. See how nice it is on the show? And here you can see, and you can easily miss it because you whiz by on 23. But what I love, their address is Stagers Loop. Very cool. And there's quite some articles and things about the Gooding family, and it was in their family for a long, long time. But they produced all this wool, butter, cheese, and then and passengers, and then they did the one-stop shop, took care of the horses, the whole everything. Very busy. Old days. And this, of course, it didn't look like that when it was the stage. This is more what it looked like as Hopkins' house. It was much more rustic and actually rickety when it was. I mean, this was rural, right? There was nothing fancy at the time, way before this. And here, which I love, the 1816 room at the Myers Inn. And they talk about, you know, all these people that were there. And they really like Johnny Appleseed. They have a little statue of him in the town square. I guess because he dropped by or something. I don't know. And then here's, this is a very typical site that they have at the Clark Heritage about what it would have been like. Always, of course, alcohol, a big, big factor. In fact, they've said at Colonial Williamsburg, taverns all over the place. Only some have been reconstructed, but like the first thing in a lot of towns was the tavern. Yeah, so this would have been very common. And then here's the Overland Inn, and you can visit in McCutcheonville on State Route 53. But as I said, they didn't know this, their stop was Tomochi. So if you go visit, you'll go, I understand this was Tomochi. They'll be like, oh, how do you know that? Right. Becky. Because the guy, you know, the curator knows me now. So, but these are funny, all these rules, what you could and couldn't do. And they were pretty strict. You know, they didn't want people like leaning on each other, which would have been really impossible not to in the stagecoach, or, you know, snoring or whatever. But of course, come on, you know, you were traveling all like through the night or this, or, I mean, anything goes, right? Like, where'd you go to the bathroom? It wasn't like Wayside like we have, right? And, well, McDonald's is our bathroom often, right? All right, so the last thing, newspapers, very central to tavern life. They were also always, you know, today we go, oh, they're just partisan, you know, Fox versus MSNBC or CNN. That's always been there. There's only been like a short time when there was even an attempt not to be very partisan. So all the newspapers forever have been either Democrat or Republican, or when there were all these other lots of other political parties in the past, and libertarian too today. So lively debate. There were fights too, of course, over these issues. But some tavern owners did not permit newspapers that weren't in agreement with their views. That'd be good. Okay, and then there's some great websites about this, but they helped spur the American Revolution. And I like this. This is the legislative order noting how the Declaration was to be distributed. Each church, here, remember this separation of church and state and so on? Each church was, the ministers were required to read it to their congregations, and says how it was directed and done. And then copies would have been at all the taverns and meeting houses. And that's how they distributed it. And common sense, another of the central documents that really fueled the revolution. And by the way, he was not an American. He was a recent immigrant from England. Sick of the king, right? Sick of not having land and, you know, not being able to make a living independently. And people that couldn't read, which wasn't that typical, because as we said, the literacy rate was very high, but was read aloud to them. what was really good is that on the website it said Payne was not from Harvard or Yale or Oxford, and that was good because then he made the language very accessible to the public, not the like academic articles today versus popular magazine. Well, he knew, well, if they don't understand what I'm talking about, nothing's going to happen. Okay, any questions or comments, or something you want to contribute? Yes?
Curious, on the stagecoaches, were they susceptible to robbery at all?
Oh, yeah. Oh, good point. Yes. We think about the West as the place where there was all these armed robberies and, but yeah, yes, they were. And in fact, that's a whole other presentation, but if you look up the name online, Otto Hinton, O-T-H-O Hinton, who was a big deal in Delaware, like a founding father, and he was also was a partner in the Ohio Stage Company for a while. He stole today's $1 million worth of cash from the mails because he was in charge of it. And so there was this amazing, this man in Santa Rosa, California, where Hinton ended up from here when he took off to avoid prosecution. He was talked about in newspapers across the country. Everyone knew who he was. He got married. He married someone, well, he was already married and left his wife here. There was a child. I mean, there was all kind of scandalous stuff. He was never prosecuted, or he was prosecuted but never convicted. They kind of just like gave up because he was a big talker. And he ended up as a lawyer with no legal, just lawyer, in Santa Rosa, California, very successful. And this man, a writer in, I think it was 2016, wrote 4 excellent articles that I happened to find because I ran across the name Otto Hinton when I was first looking at Stagecoach stuff here. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is like the most rollicking thing. But yeah, so the manager himself stole cash, but that was more common to have robbers come, to the Stagecoach. And yeah, yes. But if you look it up, you'll see these 4 articles come up. It's just amazing, right? Reading, yes.
To go with the robbery of the stagecoach, I understood that the stagecoach drivers would hold the reins in their left hand so they could shoot with their right.
Yeah.
And then when cars came, you hold the steering wheel with your left, and then you shift with your right.
Oh.
So that's a reflection of that time.
Oh, that's an interesting.
It's
Yeah.
still today.
Yeah.
Now,
That's
UK
funny.
didn't have that problem. That's
In
why
what?
they drive on the United Kingdom.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
They drive on the other side.
Oh, right.
Because it makes much more sense to
Yeah.
have the steering wheel in your right hand
Yeah.
and shift with your
Yeah.
left.
Oh,
because
does
it's dumb.
Yeah, no. I'm left-handed, so I
Oh.
get very mixed up about it. But I think as far as I know, with the Eastern stagecoaches, it wasn't as this gun and all this was much more in the West. I mean, it wasn't that robberies didn't happen, but it was much more pervasive, partly because of the amount of money that they transported for Wells Fargo.
But the drivers were armed, right?
Yes.
Stagecoach
Oh,
drivers.
yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I noticed that the rear wheels in a lot of those coaches were bigger than the front. Do you know why?
It must have been because of the. What? Go ahead.
Front wheels are smaller for steering.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm always glad when I have like an engineer type or someone who knows. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry.
Do they use like a hub and spoke system, or do you have like the same stagecoach will go all the way through the whole line, or did they just go like the next stop and turn around and come back?
No, good point. So mostly they did go through. It's the horses that were changed. The stagecoach, yes, the same, and the same driver. And then they turn around, and then there were other stagecoaches involved, but they stayed on the the route, unless it broke down, which did happen, of course, a lot. But it was the horses that had to be changed, yeah. And then imagine the logistics and the different horse teams, too, that you had to know which horses were left at, like, this thing and that place, right, so, yeah.
Well, your stagecoach broke down and you were on. Can you get on the next one, or are you?
Sometimes, but sometimes they had to wait, or there are also people that fixed them. I mean, that was their job. And sometimes they were there at the stage places waiting and for whatever, you know, they had to do. But yeah, yeah, but there weren't, yeah, there weren't like a stable of them. Yeah, and it depends, again, like you would be in the cities, there would be more availability, right? In some of the rural areas, you just, whatever. Yeah, 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 or a wagon. You know, they get a wagon to take you, if necessary, probably, yeah. Yeah.
Did they always change horses every 10 miles, or were there just routes where they didn't race the horse so hard?
I'm sure there was abuse of some of the horses too. It was frequent that they died or they were ill, but you pretty much had to. I mean, you couldn't take. They just wouldn't go. You had to change. It was very difficult. These were heavy.
So if you broke down, it's only 10 miles from one place to another place. You can walk back to the next stop.
Yeah, maybe.
Get your horse.
Yeah. Yeah. There, I haven't read all the. I'm sure there's some on the ins and outs or in people's diaries. I bet you there's, you know, or accounts of. Yeah, I was hoping. I was going to go down to the Library of Ohio and to OHC to see if they have more records of some of the inns there and drivers and so on, because there have to be more than I've been able, you know, around here of the records. Yeah.
You showed us a little route there that Dickens was on, but you didn't mention what he wrote about the trip in Ohio and Delaware.
Oh yeah, he.
Do you have that?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so he said, there being no stagecoach next day upon the road we wished to take, now this is Dickens, of course, right? I hired an extra, so here, right, a private coach at a reasonable charge. He was wealthy though, so what's reasonable? It probably wasn't reasonable. To carry us to Tiffin, a small town from whence there is a railroad to Sandusky. This extra was an ordinary 4-horse stagecoach, such as I have described, changing horses and drivers as the stagecoach would, but was exclusively our own for the journey. That would be nice, yeah. To ensure our having horses at the proper stations and being incommoded by no strangers, the proprietors sent an agent on the box who was to accompany us the whole way through, and thus attended and bearing with us, besides, a hamper full of savory cold meats and fruit and wine. We started off again in high spirits. At 6:30 the next morning, very much delighted to be by ourselves and disposed to enjoy even the roughest journey. It was well for us that we were in this humor, for the road we went over that day, a corduroy road, he said, was certainly enough to have shaken tempers that were not resolutely at set fair, down to some inches below stormy. At one time we were all flung together in a heap at the bottom of the coach, and at another we were crushing our heads against the roof. Now one side was down deep in the mire and we were holding on to the other. Now the coach was lying on the tails of the two-wheelers, and now it was rearing up in the air in a frantic state with all 4 horses standing on the top of an insurmountable eminence, looking coolly back at it as though they would say, "Unharness us, it can't be done." Thank you, because I did. But, you know, as only Dickens would write, so. And he did stay at the Golden Lamb, and today you can stay in the room where he slept, which I have. Yeah. Yeah, sure.